Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 482. I'm the 492. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We got a lot of news to talk about on today's show. We're actually a day late on this episode. So the news I'm covering today is pretty much just going to be updates on the war in Israel. We'll have updates on the China situation and the proxy war with Russia on the next episode of the show, which should be out tomorrow morning. Make sure you're subscribed to the show. That way you get episodes as soon as they drop. Typically, episodes will come out Monday, Wednesday, Friday mornings. I've been a little busy this past week, so the schedule's been slightly off. But we still will have 3 shows out, both last week and this week. So, again, find the show YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version. It's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_, and on Instagram, I'm KyleAnzalone3. On Facebook, just my name, Kyle Anzalone. Find me, follow me, share my stuff. I really appreciate it. Always put out the shows as well as all the articles I write. And with that, let's get into today's episode, where first article I have here, I wrote for antiwar.com on Friday. New House Speaker: Russia, China, and Iran are the new axis of evil. Representative Mike Johnson vowed to support the wars in Ukraine and Israel in an interview after becoming House Speaker. The congressman told Sean Hannity that Russia, China, and Iran make up an axis of evil that pose a huge threat to the U.S. The speaker presented Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran as a trilateral threat to Washington. He said, "Big priorities in this moment right now. We have Israel being attacked. We have unrest. We have the Ukraine situation we've got to deal with. We've got China being aggressive. We've got Iran with all the meddling. And China and Russia and Iran are working together. This is a dangerous time. Hamas and Hezbollah are proxies of Iran, and they are tied in now with Russia and China. I mean, it is a new axis of evil. That's how we see it." Johnson continued, "The states pose a huge threat to the U.S. It's the biggest threat since World War II. On Ukraine, Johnson stated that he does not support the White House's $105 billion bill that would fund the wars in Ukraine, Israel, and Gaza. Israel's war on Gaza, and fund Washington's military buildup in the Pacific, as well as provide additional border security. The speaker said that the consensus among House Republicans is to split the funding into different bills. As well as supporting future aid for Ukraine, the speaker is willing to send American soldiers to the Middle East in defense of Israel. He said, "Watching it very closely, one thing that House Republicans are resolved in is that we must stand with our most important ally in the Middle East, and that is Israel." He added, "I hope it doesn't come to boots on the ground," suggesting that he would be willing to take that step if it came to that. So now we have an article by Dave DeCamp that came out just after mine. House Speaker says bill to split Israel aid from Ukraine will be brought to the floor. The newly elected House Speaker, and by the way, he's a Republican from Louisiana. I really wasn't aware of Mike Johnson at all before he came Speaker. I think that's how most people are reacting to his speakership, and probably why he got the job is that he was a little bit of an unknown candidate who had some interesting votes. He had voted in favor of some of the massive aid bills to Ukraine, but also voted against some. So I guess people were able to see things they liked in Johnson. So on Sunday, he indicated that a standalone bill to provide Israel with billions more in aid will be brought to the House floor this week instead of Biden's $105 billion request that also includes spending for Ukraine, Taiwan, and the border. He told Fox News, Sunday Morning Futures, "We're going to move a standalone Israel funding bill this week in the House. I know our Republican colleagues in the Senate, have a similar measure." A group of Senate Republicans introduced a bill to provide Israel with $14.3 billion in additional military aid the same amount that was in Biden's $105 billion request. The $14.3 billion will be in addition to the $3.8 billion that Israel receives annually from the U.S. in military assistance. Johnson, who is an evangelical Christian, has expressed support for continuing the proxy war against Ukraine, but says Israel is the priority. We believe that this is a pressing and urgent need. There are a lot of things going on around the world that we have to address, and we will, but right now, what's happening in Israel takes the immediate attention, and I think we've got to separate that to get it through. So this is kind of interesting because actually, if you're probably looking at who needs it more, Ukraine would need the money more. Now, I don't support funding for either of these wars, but it's just interesting, I guess, that politically, the aid for Israel is so much more popular that they think that they'll be able to push that through. It'll be interesting to see if the Democrats support this. They may oppose it, fearing that the Republicans, if they pass this bill, would then be unwilling to pass a separate funding bill for Ukraine, or at least the size of one that Biden wants. So Ukraine aid would not be debated again until after the 2024 election. So Johnson continues here, Michael McCall, a Republican for Texas and the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, has also said that a standalone Israel bill will be coming this week. I think we are going to do is really because we need to. It's so urgent now in Israel is also to start with Israel first and then deal with the other. And so again, this is just interesting because, the power disparity between Israel and the Palestinians is absolutely massive. And so to say Israel needs it, as in something bad would happen to Israel without this $14 billion, just simply isn't true. Where not that I would support sending this funding to Ukraine, not that I'm saying Ukraine needs this. There are other paths forward in Ukraine. However, Ukraine is dependent on the U.S. and the U.S. is running out of money to ship weapons to Ukraine. So, it would seem that if you're looking at priorities, he said, that should be the priority. Johnson has previously voted against Ukraine aid packages, but said in an interview on Thursday that he believes the U.S. should keep supporting the war there. Now, we can't allow Vladimir Putin to prevail in Ukraine because I don't believe it would stop there. Johnson also tied together the wars in Gaza, Ukraine, and the new Cold War against China as, the axis of evil that we already mentioned. So, one more article here on our new House Speaker, and that is just that they have unveiled the $14.3 billion legislation. The bill apparently would cut the money from the IRS to pay the military aid to Israel, which is interesting. The Democrats in the White House won't like it. I really hate defense spending, but I also hate the IRS, so at least I guess it's coming from that department, but still, this is a horrible bit of money that is going to go to Israel, and we'll talk about what they're doing with that money coming up here and why I'm so opposed to sending it, because of the cruelty that Tel Aviv is unleashing upon the people in Gaza. So let's start. I just want to mention here, Dave has this article that right after Mike Johnson was elected Speaker of the House, the House on Wednesday, so this was last week, 1 week ago tomorrow, passed or approved a resolution that expressed strong support for Israel. The first bill that was brought to the floor after Representative Mike Johnson was elected the leader as the Speaker of the House. The resolution passed with a vote of 412 to 10 and says the U.S. stands with Israel in the wake of the October 7th Hamas attack, and as Israel is relentlessly bombing Gaza. The resolution affirmed the U.S. commitment to providing military aid to Israel and said Congress will work to pass more, which we're seeing now. It says 9 Democrats here voted against the resolution, so that's Bowman, Carson, Cori Bush, Al Green, Summer Lee, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Ramirez, Tlaib, and the only Republican to vote against it was Thomas Massie. So huge pat on the back to Massie there, because it's not easy to stand against Israel in the Republican Party, and doing so is important, because they're talking about giving away billions of our dollars, of course, but to fund an ethnic cleansing campaign is really problematic. All right, so President Biden accuses Palestinians of lying about civilian casualties. So last week, President Biden accused Palestinians in Gaza of lying about the civilian casualty rate when confronted about the massive number of child casualties in the Israeli bombardment. According to the latest numbers from the Gaza Health Ministry, over 6,500 Palestinians have been killed in Israel's onslaught, including more than 2,700 children. A reporter asked Biden if the figures demonstrate that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is ignoring U.S. calls to minimize civilian casualties. And he said, "What they say to me is that I have no notion that the Palestinians are telling the truth about how many people are killed. I'm sure innocents have been killed, and it's a price of waging war." And Biden said, the president added that Israel should be incredibly careful to go after Hamas. And he said that he has no confidence in the number that the Palestinians are using, which is crazy, because the Palestinian number, not only did they publish an actual list of names of the civilians killed, so that at least the 7,000 number, that they were at towards the end of last week, they do have names for everyone, or I think they have names for like 6,800, and then they had about 200 people who, this is terrible, found arms, found legs, found pieces of the body, which just what they have as resources right now in Gaza, they're unable to tell who those people are, and due to the lack of capacity in the morgues, and also the need to just get do something with the bodies, they just can't sit and wait, and so a lot of people in Gaza are being buried in mass graves, and so my guess is a lot of these people will never be identified. They'll just be missing, and years from now they'll be assumed dead. So let's and then I also wanted to mention that after the weekend, so as of Tuesday morning, I did see that Palestinian sources are putting that number at over 9,000 killed, and I can't remember the number of children. It's over 3,500, I believe. But I did see this morning that the Israeli government put out a statement on its bombing campaign of Gaza, and they say that over 9,000 terrorists have been killed. And so, of course, the Israeli version of this is propaganda, labeling every single person killed in Gaza by their airstrikes as a terrorist, but they are admitting that the death toll is over 9,000. And so I think that essentially confirms the numbers that the Palestinians are putting out. The only dispute is, the Palestinians are saying that a few thousand of them were children, which the Israeli government might agree with. And they might say that, basically at this point, anyone in Gaza is considered a terrorist from our viewpoint. I saw, and this has been gaining a lot of attention, Scott Adams, the Dilbert guy, who is just so bad on these Middle East issues and has so little understanding of what's actually going on, but weighs in on it and just, tries to really tip the scale. And so he makes a big deal about how the children in Hamas are taught to hate the Israeli, or the children in Gaza, excuse me, are just developed and grow up on hating and wanting to kill Israelis. And so he frames the question around getting people to support, and I think like a plurality of people in his poll had supported the idea that if a child is raised in that way, then you could kill them, and they're just considered a terrorist or a combatant or something like that. And this is also the sentiment of the Israeli government. They have former ministers, I think it was a justice minister, who said something along the lines of, you have to kill the Palestinian women because they birth baby snakes. So it's just terrible things happening here. And with the U.S. Giving cover. Biden's just giving cover to it by suggesting that the numbers aren't accurate there, even if the Israelis are basically coming out and confirming them. All right, next up here, Oxfam, Israel using starvation as weapon of war against Gaza civilians. The international charity group Oxfam has said Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war against Palestinian civilians living in Gaza, as barely any food is being delivered to the besieged enclave. Gaza has been under blockade since 2007, and Israel imposed a total siege on the enclave on October 9th, cutting off all food, fuel, and medicine. A limited number of aid trucks have been allowed into Gaza from Egypt, but Oxfam says that only 2% of the food that was previously delivered is going in. The international agency analyzed UN data and found that just 2% of the food that would have been delivered has entered Gaza since the total siege began. Oxfam said in a press release, while a small amount of food has been allowed in, no commercial food imports have been delivered. The statement continued. Oxfam said that prior to the total siege, 104 aid delivery trucks food were carried into Gaza every day. Since the weekend, 62 trucks have been allowed to enter Gaza through Egypt, but only 30 were carrying food. The situation is nothing short of horrific. Where is the humanity? Millions of civilians are being collectively punished in a full view of the world. There can be no justification for using starvation as a weapon of war, Oxfam's Middle East director said. Oxfam said Gaza is virtually out of clean water, making some of the food that has been let in, such as rice and lentils, useless since people do not have clean water or fuel to prepare them. The group said that the Israeli airstrikes have hit bakeries and supermarkets, further straining food supplies. The electricity blackout and the lack of fuel have also disrupted the supply of food. And so I want to mention here that I read a story. It was in Middle East Eye, and it was one of their ground reporters in Gaza. He said that one day, I think it was on the 25th, so late last week, he was standing in the line of one of these bakeries that received supplies from the UN to, produce food. And there was like an agreement that they would sell it at no profit, right? And so, they're just making food and distributing it in order to get as many people food as possible. So people are waiting for hours in a line, and then the Israeli government starts carrying out airstrikes on the street over. Everybody in that line flees, and then they carry out airstrikes in the vicinity of the bakery where people were waiting in the bread line. And so these are really significant crimes and really horrific what Israel is doing to the people of Gaza, targeting bakeries and things like that. All right, next up here is an article I wrote for antiwar.com last week. Massive Israeli strikes cut internet in Gaza. IDF begins ground operations. So the Israeli Defense Forces announced, and that's the IDF, announced an expansion of its ground operations into the Gaza Strip. Israeli airstrikes on the besieged enclave have knocked out communications for 2 million plus Palestinians living there. So I wrote this on Friday. So, on Friday, it appears Tel Aviv launched its anticipated ground invasion into Gaza as the Israeli Air Force pounded the region, causing a near communications blackout. Military spokesperson for Israel said the Air Force is striking underground targets very significantly. Ground forces are expanding the ground activities this evening. And, from Friday to Tuesday, it does seem certain that this was the start of the ground invasion. It wasn't, some kind of little probing operation or something like that. They do seem to have moved in with a significant amount of forces. They're fighting around Gaza City this morning, I believe. So the Jordanian foreign minister explained that the ground operations would cause a humanitarian catastrophe. He's posted on X. Israel just launched a ground war on Gaza. The outcome will be a humanitarian catastrophe of epic proportions for years to come. Voting against the Arab UN General Assembly resolution means approving this senseless war, this senseless killing. Millions will be watching every vote. History will be judged. And so he's talking there about UN General Assembly resolution that I believe did pass quite significantly. I think only about 14 countries voted against it, and of course the U.S. and Israel were two. I think Hungary and Austria were the two European countries to vote against it, and then the other countries, just very small nations. And so there was not a lot of support for voting against this resolution that was sponsored by the Arab nations and had called for a ceasefire. So, he's just pointing out that people who are supporting this, like the U.S. is, I do think, he's right about history not being a favorable judge. It's going to, say that Washington was the key and crucial supporter of Tel Aviv while it carried out its genocide in Gaza. So a Palestinian communications provider, two of them actually, issued a statement on X on Friday and said that the bombing had nearly completely disabled cell phone and internet settings in Gaza. We regret, the statement said, we regret to announce a complete interruption of all communications and internet services in the Gaza Strip in the light of the ongoing aggression. The intense bombing in the last hour caused the destruction of all remaining international routes linking Gaza to the outside world. My understanding is that as of Monday, that was improved. So over the weekend really was the worst of the communications blackout, which is now less significant, but still, limited communications and limited ability to communicate by the people in Gaza, not just because the internet's out, but also because Israel has knocked out a lot of the power, no longer allowing fuel into Gaza. And so, barely the hospitals and the ambulances are running at this point. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society reported in the Middle East Eye it had lost contact with its aid workers in Gaza. They said we have completely lost contact with the operations room in the Gaza Strip, and all our teams are operating there due to the Israeli authorities cutting off all landline, cellular, internet communications. We call on the international community to exert pressure on the Israeli authorities to provide immediate protection to innocent civilians, medical facilities, and our teams. Al Jazeera notes it has inconsistent communications with some reporters in the besieged enclave. The Committee to Protect Journalists reports 24 journalists have been killed by the Israeli bombing campaign. I believe that number is now up to 26 or 27, 26 in Gaza, and then one in Lebanon where Israel killed, I think, a Reuters journalist. So the IDF invading Gaza risks provoking a wider war in the Middle East that could draw in the U.S. Hezbollah has threatened to launch an attack on northern Israel in response to a ground invasion. Shia militias in Iraq and Syria have targeted American soldiers occupying those countries in response to the Washington-backed onslaught against the Palestinians. The invasion comes as the Israeli Operation Iron Swords enters its fourth week. Multiple neighborhoods in Gaza have been completely eliminated in the Israeli bombing campaign. Palestinian sources say that at least 7,000 have been killed in the Israeli operations, including over 2,600 children. Authorities in Gaza say more dead are buried under the rubble. So President Joe Biden says he doubts the death toll. However, the Palestinians have provided the list. And then, after me writing this, I feel like the Israelis essentially confirmed what I was saying there about, this number seeming accurate. So next up here, Israel says it's following U.S. advice in its ground operation. Israel's current ground operation in Gaza is aligned with the U.S. advice being given, U.S. officials told the Time of Israel. The officials said that Israel had launched a limited ground invasion, which is what the U.S. recommended to avoid harming hostages, as to opposed to a full-scale invasion. Hamas has claimed that 50 hostages have already been killed by Israeli airstrikes, but that number has not been confirmed. The U.S. official said that Israel did not need pressure from the U.S. to launch this limited incursion. The New York Times reported that Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin advised a limited ground incursion in talks with his Israeli counterpart. The Pentagon has also dispatched a three-star Marine Corps general and other officers to serve as military advisors, demonstrating how deeply the U.S. is involved in the war planning here. When Israeli ground forces entered Gaza on Friday, the enclave's phone and internet services were cut, blacking out any media coverage of on the ground and making rescue operations significantly more difficult. Services were restored Sunday morning after 34 hours. A U.S. official told the Wall Street Journal that the U.S. had convinced Israel to restore Gaza's phone and internet services after shutting it down so the UN and aid groups could communicate with their staff in the enclave. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said Saturday that Israel's war in Gaza had entered a second stage and told Israelis to prepare for a long and hard offensive. Hamas's armed wing, the Al-Qassam's brigade, said Sunday that its forces were engaged in heavy fighting with the invading occupation forces in northwest Gaza. While Israel's ground incursion might be more limited than initially planned, the airstrikes have continued to pound Gaza relentlessly. According to Al Jazeera, Gaza residents described the weekend's bombardment as the most intense yet. The Gaza Health Ministry report the death toll in the enclave since Israel unleashed its bombing campaign has surpassed 8,000, including over 3,000 children. All right. Next up here, leaked Israeli intelligence ministry document proposes complete ethnic cleansing of Gaza. So a leaked document drafted by Israel's military intelligence ministry, so the Israeli intelligence ministry, proposed the ethnic cleansing of approximately 2.3 million Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip as a potential solution to Israel's war against Hamas. The document is dated October 13th, was published in the Hebrew language website, by a Hebrew language website, Shash Mekomit, and the Israeli government has confirmed its authenticity. According to the Times of Israel, Israeli government officials are downplaying the document, saying it only represents initial thoughts and that they are currently focused on the war effort. The proposed plan would involve pushing the Palestinians out of Gaza and into the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula. They would first live in tent cities until permanent structures are built. The plan also includes a several kilometers wide sterile buffer zone inside Egypt so Palestinians could not live on the border. The document proposes two other potential plans, including handing Gaza over to the Palestinian Authority once Hamas is defeated. Another proposal would involve Israel propping up a new Arab regime in Gaza, but the document says these two proposals would not sufficiently deter future attacks and that the preferred option is the cleansing of Palestinians from Gaza. The writers of the document say that allowing the PA to administer Gaza is the most dangerous alternative of the three options because it could lead to the establishment of a Palestinian state. While Israeli government officials are downplaying the document and its existence, and say its existence does not mean it's an Israeli policy that Tel Aviv will implement, some parts of the proposal are being carried out. The document says the first phase of the plan would be to evacuate the northern Gaza Strip, which Israel has already ordered, and to focus airstrikes on the north before a ground invasion, and that's essentially what's gone on. The biggest impediment to Israel's cleansing of Gaza of Palestinians is opposition from Egypt and other Arab international partners. The document says that part of the plan is for the U.S. to exert pressure on Egypt, Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE to contribute to the initiative, either in resources or in accepting any displaced persons. So far, the U.S. has expressed opposition to the idea of kicking Palestinians out of Gaza. President Biden spoke with Egyptian President al-Sisi on Sunday, and according to the White House, the two leaders discussed the importance of ensuring the Palestinians in Gaza are not displaced to Egypt or any other nation. However, there are indications the U.S. might be preparing for the possibility of an influx of Palestinian refugees leaving Gaza. In a letter to Congress requesting $105 billion in spending on the including on the Gaza war, Ukraine, Taiwan, and other areas, the White House said that some of the fundings would be needed for the potential needs of Gazans fleeing to neighboring countries. So it certainly sounds like they are getting ready to fund the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, even if they're going to claim they don't support it at the same time. All right, so we have 26 journalists killed in Gaza since October 7th, and this was reported by the Committee to Protect Journalists. Of course, we also have one other journalist killed by Israeli soldiers, and that was in southern Lebanon. All right, Israeli airstrikes kill 8 Syrian soldiers in southern Syria. This happened last week. It was reported by Syria's Sana news agency, and the strikes were located in southern Syria in the Dara province, and it came after Israel said rockets were fired from Syria towards Israel. So, this is just a part of the increasing and wider war that's occurring because Israel is trying to ethnically cleanse Gaza. In response, we have U.S. airstrikes targeting eastern Syria. The Pentagon said Thursday night that it launched airstrikes in eastern Syria that targeted 2 facilities used by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and affiliated groups. It's a significant escalation that makes a regional war more likely amid the Israeli bombardment of Gaza. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said in a statement that the strikes were in response to a series of rocket and drone attacks that have targeted U.S. military bases in Iraq and Syria in recent weeks, which the U.S. is blaming on Iranian-backed militias, referring to the Shia militias that operate in the region. These precision self-defense strikes are a response to a series of ongoing and mostly unsuccessful attacks against U.S. personnel in Iraq and Syria by Iranian-backed militia groups that began on October 17th, Austin said. The U.S. said that Iran is responsible for the attacks on U.S. troops, although the Pentagon acknowledged it has no evidence that Iran directed them. The Shia militias are also known to act independently. The U.S. recently told CNN, a U.S. official recently told CNN that how willing those groups are to act independently is a persistent intelligence gap for the U.S. And I think that just means that U.S. officials aren't smart enough to understand that these groups are willing to act independently of Iran, but they do have aligned interests, and for that reason they do receive support from Iran, but not necessarily instructions on what to do. Israeli warplanes launched more strikes in Syria and Lebanon. Dave DeCamp wrote this for antiwar.com yesterday, October 30th. And so Israeli warplanes launched strikes in Syria early on Monday, targeting military positions in the southwest Dara province. The Israeli military also reported strikes in Lebanon as the risk of Israel's war in Gaza turn into a full-blown regional crisis. The Israeli military said the strikes in Syria were in response to rocket fire that came from Syria, while the strikes could be related to Israel's Gaza war. Israel frequently bombed Syria with impunity before the conflict and stepped up its strikes since. I think the Israeli position is more or less they're going to argue that Tehran is organizing the Shia militias and funneling weapons and support to them in and through Syria, and so that's why they're carrying out these strikes. I think it's far more likely that Israel is just looking, kind of has this mindset that we're going to deter Syria from getting more involved in this war by constantly bombing Syria and reminding the Syrian government of how much more powerful we are than them and how much damage we could inflict on the Syrian state if we so chose to. And so I think this is, Israel just kind of carrying out a preemptive threat and, could actually provoke a war rather than preventing one. So the Pentagon says U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria have been attacked 23 times since October 17th. That's about 2 weeks, and this is essentially what we expected, I think. 2 or 3 attacks a day. It seems like what is going to be the case for as long as the U.S. is giving this blanket support to Israel to do what it's doing to the Palestinians. And last up here, U.S. sends 900 troops to the Middle East. And so rather than resolving this problem by removing our troops from the line of fire, we're going the complete opposite way and putting more troops in the line of fire. And so makes it more likely that a U.S. troop gets killed. Then we have Republican congressmen saying if we don't go to war with Iran, then Tehran is getting away with killing American soldiers. So we got to go to war with Iran. And this is just a huge disaster waiting to happen. Anyways, that's where I'm going to wrap up the show for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I'll be back with another show tomorrow.